Omega is shutting down stores. And if you saw that headline and thought, another luxury brand in decline, but things are much more complicated than that. However, one thing is certain. People on top of the Omega food chain aren't winning because it's no longer business as usual. So, what's actually happening? By the end of this video, you'll find out. But first, let's start with how we got here. The illusion of growth. The story of Omega's distribution over the past 3 decades is a story that looked like success from the outside and felt increasingly uncomfortable from the inside. After Swatch Group consolidated the Swiss watch industry through the 80s and 90s, the strategy for its flagship brand was straightforward. Put Omega everywhere. Build the boutique network. Place watches in jewelers and multi-brand retailers across every major market. Make Omega the watch that the person who could not yet afford a Rolex could find, purchase, and own without the friction and relationship games that define the higher end of the market. It worked. Omega grew. The brand became globally accessible. It became visible in airports, in department stores, in authorized dealer cases, in cities where the competition had nothing close to the same presence. The Seamaster Diver 300M became the James Bond watch. The Speedmaster became the NASA watch. These cultural associations drove demand that the distribution network captured and converted into revenue at scale. But volume has a cost that does not appear on the income statement until it is too late to ignore. More stores meant more inventory in more hands. More inventory in more hands meant more pressure on individual dealers to move stock. And dealers under pressure to move stock do what dealers always do when the manufacturer is not watching them closely enough. They discount. Of course, they didn't have Omega's blessing. A jeweler with excess Seamasters tells a good customer that the price on the tag is negotiable. An authorized dealer with inventory pressure moves watches to gray market channels at 30 or 35% below retail. Overstock finds its way out the door through intermediaries who never appear on Omega's official list of partners. The gray market numbers are not theoretical. The Omega Speedmaster Professional Moon Watch, the watch that went to the moon in 1969, that NASA certified above every competitor in tests of extreme temperature and vibration and pressure, trades approximately 31% below its retail price through gray market channels in 2026. The Seamaster Diver 300M, the James Bond watch, is available new in box for roughly 25% below what an Omega boutique charges. These are not vintage pieces with provenance complications. They are current production, brand new, with box and papers, available through channels that exist entirely because authorized dealers have more inventory than they can sell at full retail. The result? A buyer who walks into an Omega boutique and pays $6,700 for a Seamaster Planet Ocean can find the same watch, new in box, on the gray market for roughly $4,700. That gap is not a secret. It is documented, widely discussed in watch communities, and structurally damaging to the perception of the brand in a way that no marketing campaign can fully repair. More stores did not mean more control. It meant less. And less control over pricing is, in luxury goods, the beginning of a very specific kind of erosion. Omega built the pipes, the brand equity, the cultural capital, the meaning attached to the crown and arrows. But things were severely out of control. Value was flowing out in directions, and Omega could only just watch as they went down to the proverbial bottom. The thing is, the problem is not the discount, but it is what the discount signals about the brand and who is actually controlling the story, the problem with dealers. Picture the moment Omega would most prefer you to experience. You walk into a beautifully designed space. The lighting is deliberate. The cases are arranged to create a specific emotional journey from the entry-level pieces to the upper range. A knowledgeable staff member who understands the brand's history, the NASA certification, the Olympic timing heritage, the METAS program, talks you through the watch you are considering. You understand, by the time you leave, not just what you bought, but why it matters and why it is worth the price on the tag. Now, picture what actually happens in a substantial portion of Omega sales globally. You walk into a jeweler that also stocks Breitling, TAG Heuer, Longines, Tissot, and 12 other brands, the staff member is not an Omega specialist. They are a generalist who sells whatever the customer gravitates toward, and whoever made their morning easier with a better incentive structure this quarter may well be the brand that gets pushed. Omega is one option among many. The story is not told. The comparison to other brands happens on the customer's terms, not Omega's. And the price, if the customer asks the right question and the dealer is motivated to close the sale, is not what Omega printed on the retail list. The dealer who is sitting on excess inventory offers a discount that Omega did not authorize and cannot easily prevent. The customer leaves happy. The dealer makes the sale. Omega's pricing integrity takes another small, invisible hit that will not appear in any individual transaction, but accumulates across thousands of transactions into a brand-wide perception. Omega is a watch you buy at a discount. Once that perception establishes itself, it becomes self-reinforcing. Buyers who know the brand assume there is a deal to be found. Buyers who know the deal expect it. New buyers learn from existing buyers that retail price is the opening position, not the final one. And the brand that has spent 30 years and significant marketing investment trying to be positioned as the technically superior watch at a price that reflects genuine value finds itself in a conversation not about quality and heritage, but about how much below sticker you can get. Multi-brand retailers are not villains. They serve a genuine function in the market. But they serve their function, not the brand's. When those interests align, the arrangement works. When they diverge, as they do under inventory pressure, in a market where the gray channel offers buyers a credible alternative, the brand pays the price in perception while the retailer captures the revenue. Omega built the product. Someone else was controlling the sale. That arrangement has run out of runway. But Omega is not the first brand to discover this problem. There is a brand that solved it first, and Omega has been studying the results for 20 years. The blueprint already exists. The Rolex model is not a secret. It has been discussed, analyzed, reverse-engineered, and admired by every other watch manufacturer at every price point since it became clear, sometime in the early 2000s, that Rolex had solved a problem the rest of the industry was still being destroyed by. The solution was not complex. Rolex progressively reduced the number of authorized dealers and progressively increased the proportion of sales through controlled channels. It applied allocation pressure, the most coveted references available only to dealers who met specific relationship and sales standards, which meant dealers who behaved in ways Rolex approved of rather than ways that served their own margins. It produced less than demand required, ensuring that no authorized dealer ever needed to discount because every authorized dealer was already in a position of scarcity rather than surplus. The specific mechanics matter. When an authorized dealer has more watches than customers, the rational behavior is to move excess inventory through whatever channel is available, including the gray market. When an authorized dealer cannot source enough watches to satisfy waiting customers, the rational behavior is to protect the relationship with the manufacturer that controls allocation. Rolex manufactured the second situation systemically and held it there. The dealer network became an asset to be preserved rather than an inventory problem to be solved. The outcome is that the Rolex Submariner trades at or above retail on secondary markets. The steel Daytona commands a premium that has persisted through market corrections, pandemic disruptions, and the inflation of speculative demand that briefly pushed prices to irrational heights. The brand does not advertise in the conventional sense. It does not need to. The cultural weight of the name and the structural scarcity of the product do the work that advertising would otherwise require, and they do it more durably. What the Rolex model demonstrated, conclusively, is that in luxury goods the perception of scarcity is worth more than the revenue from abundance. A sold-out watch that people are waiting for is more valuable than a watch that is available everywhere and being discounted to move. Omega watched this. The numbers are not ambiguous. Omega fell from 3rd to 5th in global watch brand rankings between 2024 and 2025. Rolex remained the undisputed leader. The lesson has been available for 2 decades. The question was always whether Omega would have the commercial discipline to take it. The store closures are the answer to that question. Understanding the model is one thing. Executing it costs something real, and the people who pay are not who you might expect. The shift, control over everything. What Omega is doing is not closing stores because it cannot afford to keep them open. Swatch Group generated 6.28 billion Swiss francs in net sales in 2025. The finances are not in crisis. The perception is. The shift is a deliberate redistribution of where Omega watches are sold. And by extension, who controls the experience of selling them? The direction is clear. Away from multi-brand retailers, where Omega is one option among dozens, toward Omega boutiques and tightly controlled authorized dealers, where the brand's narrative is the only narrative in the room. In 2025, more than 47% of Swatch Group sales were generated directly through the group's own retail network, a figure the company describes as a milestone in controlling brand experience. Pricing integrity and customer relationships. Pricing integrity. That phrase is doing significant work. It is the corporate way of saying we are no longer willing to watch our watches be discounted 30% by dealers who need to clear inventory, feeding a gray market that teaches customers that our retail price is a fiction. The boutique experience Omega is building toward is not primarily about aesthetics. It is about information control. In an Omega boutique, the conversation about the watch happens on Omega's terms. The staff knows the MITAS certification and can explain what it means. The comparison to Rolex, which buyers will inevitably make, is navigated by someone with a genuine understanding of why the MITAS standard is a more demanding verification than Swiss chronometer certification. The story of the 1965 NASA qualification, the 1969 lunar surface, the Olympic timing heritage. These are told by people who know them, rather than by generalists who half remember them. Control over distribution is, in luxury goods, control over meaning. The watch is the same regardless of where it is sold. The meaning of the watch. What the buyer believes they are purchasing. What story they carry with them when they leave, is entirely determined by the quality of the experience around the sale. There is a specific kind of buyer who walked into a jeweler in 2022, tried on a Seamaster, and bought it at 20% below retail because the dealer was motivated to close the month. That buyer owns an excellent watch. But they also own a purchase experience that communicated subliminally and permanently that the Omega price is negotiable, that the brand does not fully believe the number on the tag, that the official retail price is a fiction the brand maintains for its own reasons while the real price lives in the conversation. That impression does not wash off. It changes the relationship between the buyer and the brand in ways that persist long after the discount is forgotten. Omega cannot repair it with advertising. It can only repair it by making the discounted purchase experience impossible. So, the options were removing the dealers who offered it, closing the channels that sustained it, and rebuilding from a position where every authorized point of sale is a place where the brand's story is told correctly and the brand's price is not negotiated. This is not a contraction. This is consolidation. And there is a meaningful difference between the two. Here's a question for you. If you have been buying Omega watches at gray market prices, 30, sometimes 35% below retail, what happens to that option as Omega tightens its distribution? Are you ready for a world where the gray market discount disappears because there is no surplus inventory for the gray market to absorb? Drop it below. We want to know whether you buy Omega at retail through the gray market or whether this whole conversation changes how you think about the brand. So, for Omega, it took all of those options we mentioned before. Their strategy is clear. The external pressure that made it urgent is less visible and more interesting. The hidden pressure. The store closures did not happen because Omega woke up one morning and decided to implement a distribution strategy. They happened because the forces that made the old strategy livable have been shifting for several years, and the combination of those forces reached a threshold that made the status quo untenable. The gray market problem is documented and measurable. The Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch trades approximately 31% below its retail price through gray market channels. The Seamaster Diver 300M is available new for roughly 25 to 30% below the retail tag that Omega's authorized boutiques charge. These discounts do not exist because gray market dealers are performing charity. They exist because authorized dealers have more inventory than demand can absorb at full retail, and the path of least resistance for that inventory is the gray channel. This is not Omega's first attempt to address the problem. In 2019, Swatch Group executed a deliberate crackdown on gray market feeding. They cut allocations to known gray market suppliers, monitoring authorized dealer selling behavior more aggressively, threatening franchise termination for dealers caught moving stock to unauthorized channels. Analysts estimated the crackdown cost Swatch hundreds of millions of Swiss francs in first-half revenue. This is because the supply that had been feeding the gray market dried up, and sales through official channels did not fully compensate. The company absorbed that loss consciously, signaling that it understood the long-term cost of extreme discounting exceeded the short-term cost of the crackdown. But the crackdown was partial. The underlying structural problem, too much inventory in too many hands, was not resolved, and over the following years the gray market rebuilt as inventory pressure returned. At the same time, the demand environment that had made the inventory problem manageable was cooling. The post-pandemic luxury surge that drove secondary market prices to multiples of retail across the industry peaked and corrected. The hype buyers, who had been treating Omega watches as speculative assets, exited the market as premiums compressed. The gray market equilibrated at a discount, not a premium, and Omega was left holding a distribution infrastructure built for conditions that no longer existed. China added pressure that the group could not ignore. Swatch Group reported a 14.6% drop in total sales in 2024, driven substantially by the Chinese market slowdown that affected every Swiss luxury brand with significant exposure to the region. Omega fell from 3rd to 5th in global watch brand rankings between 2024 and 2025. China headwinds plus gray market normalization, plus the end of the post-pandemic surge. Three forces arriving simultaneously, each of which would be manageable in isolation, but together creating the kind of pressure that forces strategic decisions that were previously deferred. Cutting stores is not just a strategy. It is also the removal of the supply excess that feeds the channel Omega most needs to eliminate. Fewer authorized dealers means fewer points of inventory exit. Less inventory in the gray market means less downward pressure on retail pricing. Less downward pressure on retail pricing means a brand that gradually starts to feel scarce again. And a brand that feels scarce is a brand that people want before they can have it. When control shifts, it is never frictionless. Someone always absorbs the cost. In this case, the bill goes to people who built their business model on Omega's lack of control. Who actually loses? The beneficiaries of Omega's old distribution architecture were not primarily customers. They were the intermediaries who operated in the space between what Omega officially charged and what the market would actually pay. Picture the authorized jeweler who built their entire watch floor around Omega's brand. Recognition. They trained staff on the Seamaster line. They invested in display cases and lighting and the kind of retail environment that the brand required of its partners. They put Omega at the center of their value proposition to customers, the anchor brand around which their entire luxury watch business was organized. For years, this worked. Omega's cultural presence and reasonable supply terms made the arrangement mutually beneficial. Now, Omega tells that jeweler their allocation is being reduced. The references that drove customer traffic, the Speedmaster, the Seamaster Diver, 300M, are being prioritized for the boutique network. The multi-brand retailer is welcome to continue selling the pieces they can access, but those pieces are fewer and the terms have changed. The business model built around Omega's accessibility is no longer viable in the form it took. Multi-brand authorized dealers lose first and most visibly. The gray market operators feel it next. Their inventory comes from authorized dealer surplus, and as that surplus contracts, the economics of their business change. Smaller discounts, less selection. The buyers who have been purchasing Omega watches at 30% below retail for years will find that gap narrowing, then closing for the most current references. Flippers and opportunists lose the pricing arbitrage that briefly made Omega watches an interesting speculative asset during the demand surge years. And casual buyers, the person who wandered into a jeweler, lost the ease of access that made Omega so acquisitions-friendly compared to its most aspirational competitor. The brand is making itself slightly harder to buy. That is the point. Power moves back to the brand. That is how control is always regained in luxury goods. By making acquisition a process rather than a transaction, and by ensuring that the people who shape the buying experience are the people who care most about what the brand becomes. The strategy is real and the direction is clear. So what does this mean for you in this market? Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. What this means for you. If you buy Omega watches or are thinking about buying one, the distribution shift changes the calculation in ways that are not immediately obvious. The gray market option that has historically made Omega accessible at prices well below retail is going to compress, not disappear. The gray market for any brand with sufficient global distribution never disappears entirely, but the 30% discounts on flagship references that buyers have come to expect will become harder to find as authorized dealer inventory tightens. The mechanism is straightforward. The gray market runs on surplus. Surplus comes from authorized dealers who have more watches than customers. As Omega reduces the number of authorized dealers and tightens allocation per dealer, the surplus shrinks. The gray market offer shrinks with it. If you have been considering an Omega purchase and have been waiting for the right gray market opportunity, the window is not closing today. But the direction of travel is clear, and the references most likely to feel compression first are the flagship models: the Speedmaster Professional, the Seamaster Diver 300M, the Planet Ocean, where brand investment and cultural significance are highest and where Omega has the most incentive to restore pricing integrity. The boutique experience, by contrast, is improving and will continue to improve. Omega's investment in directly controlled retail is investment in the quality of the purchase experience. Better staff, better environments, better after-sale relationships. Buyers who go through official channels in an Omega boutique are increasingly going to find a differentiated experience from what multi-brand retail offered. The conversation about the watch is different. The story is told by people who know it rather than by generalists who half remember it. The Meta certification and what it actually means, independently verified accuracy standards, magnetic resistance testing, genuine third-party certification, is explained rather than shrugged past. Understanding how allocation actually works matters more now than it did 2 years ago. The buyers who will have the best access to the most desirable references going forward are the ones who build genuine relationships with authorized boutiques rather than treating the purchase as a one-time transaction. This is how the Rolex system works, and it is how the Omega system is being restructured to work. Relationship buyers get access. Transaction buyers get whatever is left over or go to the gray market. The broader lesson: the luxury watch market in 2026 is rewarding people who understand distribution and punishing people who assume the old access patterns will persist. The brands that are winning are the ones that have taken control of their distribution. The buyers who are winning are the ones who know how that control works and position themselves inside it rather than outside it. This is not just Omega. The move Omega is making is the move the entire luxury watch industry is making, at different paces, with different starting points, but in the same direction. The bigger picture. Omega is not special in its strategy. The shift it is executing is a version of the shift the entire upper tier of the Swiss watch industry has been making since the Rolex model proved conclusively what controlled distribution is worth. Richemont, which owns Cartier, IWC, Lange & Söhne, and Jaeger LeCoultre has been expanding its direct retail network for years and progressively reducing its dependence on multi-brand wholesale. The Bucherer acquisition, which Rolex itself executed in 2023, purchasing the largest luxury watch retailer in the world, was not primarily a real estate decision. It was a distribution control decision. Rolex bought the company that sold Rolex watches, and in doing so, removed a significant channel from the gray market ecosystem that had been feeding on multi-brand retailer surplus. The direction the entire industry is moving is not subtle. Brands that can afford to control their distribution are doing so, and brands that cannot afford to are falling behind. The luxury watch market is becoming more split, not between expensive and affordable, but between brands that have achieved distribution discipline and brands that are still negotiating it. For buyers, the consequence is a market where the knowledge gap between the well-informed buyer and the casual buyer becomes more consequential with each year. In a world where the gray market discount disappears on flagship references and authorized retail prices hold firm, the person who understands timing, knows which references to prioritize, and has the right dealer relationships is operating on completely different terms from the person who shows up and asks what is available. The watch you could buy at 30% off retail in 2022 will cost you closer to retail in 2028. The store where you found the discount may not carry the brand at all. The market has moved. The question is whether you have. Luxury is not about selling more anymore. The industry learned this watching Rolex build a waiting list for a steel tool watch and maintain it for 20 years without expanding supply to meet demand. The conclusion being drawn, brand by brand and decision by decision, is that controlling who gets to buy is worth more than the revenue from unrestricted availability. Omega just confirmed that it has reached the same conclusion. Omega is not closing stores because it is failing. Omega is closing stores because it finally has the commercial clarity and the external pressure to stop doing what it knew was wrong. The old distribution model made the brand accessible. It also made the brand discountable. And in luxury goods, a brand that can be discounted is a brand that is losing the argument about its own value. Every Speedmaster that left an authorized dealer and arrived on the gray market at 31% below retail was a data point in a case being made against Omega's pricing integrity. The case was strong. The data was publicly available. Anyone paying attention could see it. The most telling number in this story is not the store count or the revenue figure. It is 47%. More than 47% of Swatch Group sales in 2025 were generated through the group's own direct retail network. That is not a coincidence or a byproduct of building nice boutiques. That is a deliberate redistribution of where watches get sold from channels the brand does not control to channels the brand does. Every percentage point of that shift is a percentage point of pricing integrity restored, a percentage point of brand narrative recaptured, a percentage point of customer relationship that belongs to Omega rather than to an intermediary with its own agenda. Now, Omega is paying attention. The stores closing are not stores that served Omega. They are stores that serve themselves using Omega's name. The distinction matters more than it sounds. A watch sold in a store that cares about the sale is a watch that enters the world accompanied by its story. A watch sold in a store that cares about the margin is a watch that enters the world as a transaction, and transactions are forgettable in a way that stories are not. Once a brand takes back control of its distribution, it rarely gives that control up again. The revenue foregone in the short term. The wholesale relationships ended, the gray market volume eliminated, and the casual impulse buyer lost to friction. This is the price of a brand identity that holds under pressure. Omega is paying that price now. Whether it pays off depends on whether the brand can build, in the boutiques it controls, an experience compelling enough to replace the accessibility it is deliberately removing. Whether it can staff those boutiques with people who know the NASA qualification story and the METIS certification and the George Daniels coaxial escapement, convey why those things matter. Whether it can make a customer who walks in willing to pay $6,700 for a Seamaster feel that the number is accurate rather than aspirational. The game has changed. The old way of buying Omega is disappearing. The question is whether you understand the new one well enough to navigate it. Which tier of this shift affects you most? Gray market buyer watching the discount shrink, boutique buyer watching the experience improve, or someone who has been on the fence about Omega entirely? Drop it below. We read every comment. Like this video and subscribe.